I know that a lot of people in this room helped make this happen. This is an extraordinary project that's built off of the same thing that PTC is, which is volunteer help and community support. There's not a better outside of our organization group to be in this building right now. As far as PTC, they helped redeck our bridge. They built the trail through this park. This is a perfect first large presentation for this room. As far as an organization, and I can't think of a more perfect person to be delivering this talk. Dave's mother, Dorothy, who passed away sadly last year, had a huge part in making this project happen. So just a perfect culmination of not only a speaker, a wonderful speaker to represent a wonderful person that had a large part in this building, but also a great organization. I'm a nonprofit director. Normally I would be saying open your wallets for my nonprofit. Right now I would say thank you so much for supporting PTC. They're an incredible organization. And if you paid $5 to come in the door, make it 10. Okay. Other than that, I'll turn it back over to Arvo. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. And I've been doing this for now 6 years, and I always forget. I'm Arvo Johnson. I've never seen my name. I don't know why that is. So I'm going to get that way before I turn over to Jeff over here. Come on, Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to make sure you knew you were Arvo Johnson. My name is Jeff Coleman. I'm on the board of the Peninsula Trails Coalition, and I really appreciate Powell having already spoken to this incredible partnership that the trail has with the tribe and with this location. It's magnificent to have you all here. Thank you for your support of the event, for your support of the location. It's, as Arvo said, wonderful to have Dave and Ann telling you about this trip. I've been on the board for a little over 30 years, not quite the full length of the organization's history. So there are some things back in the earliest of days that I didn't have clearly in mind, and I have been helpfully reminded by one of the patron saints of our organization, Dave LaRue, who's here, that it was actually 30 years ago, is that right, Dave, Ann? 30 years ago that these people did the first Traveler's Journal presentation when we were raising money to get the first piece of trestle work done. So this is full circle to be here with all of you tonight. We're thrilled that it's happening. Thank you all very much. And Dave, thank you.
I want to thank the volunteers. The ones that I know of were Sherry, Nancy, Krista, Brian for help setting up and doing everything. I'm sure I missed a few, but I want to thank the volunteers for helping getting here and setting up, and thanks to Kai and Fanny for coming here and setting up the chairs. And door prize. So I'm going to put my glasses on to get a little pile on the pavement here. So as Jeff mentioned, they've been 30 years ago here, and I think I took over. Dave probably did the Traveler's Journal, managing it for, what, 15 years or thereabouts?
I think it was
10 years, and I think 5-6 years ago, he asked me if I'd take over. I've taken over, and it's I appreciate what he did, because it's a lot of work to try to get this thing put in place, so I appreciate that, Dave, all your support on that. So, about Dave and Ann. Have lived and worked in Sequim since 1990 and have traveled to 5 continents. Well, COVID put the clamps on their international travels, everybody else seems like, it opened the eyes to many adventures available in the U.S. Regardless of destinations, their travel philosophy remains unchanged over the 3+ decades of their marriage. Be present, be kind, be grateful. And with that, introduce Dave and Ann. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvo. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Powell. My gosh, it's a real delight for Ann and I to be here this evening. I guess just want to start a little bit of a heavy heart here this evening, as I'm sure many of you have, with what's going on in Ukraine. And we're here to celebrate, and there's a lot to celebrate, and I'll get there in a second, but I didn't feel right not saying something. It's really been affecting me very deeply, and so enough. We'll move on, but I just felt I needed to say something on that front. So the celebration part of this evening, some of my thunder's already been stolen, but I really want to thank ARVO and the Peninsula Trails Coalition for putting this series back together again after a 2-year hiatus. It's great to have it back and running, and yeah, let's celebrate 30 years. That's amazing. The second thing I wanted to celebrate is the fact that we're all here, right? This is the biggest gathering I've been part of in 2 years. So yeah. And then thirdly, I want to celebrate this place. Holy cow, this is amazing. I mean, I've seen it under construction and got a sneak peek inside once, but we are so blessed in this community to have this place as a community gathering spot, and it's a gift. It's a gift to the whole community. And with that, I will hand it over to Ann to kick off our show, A River Runs Through Us.
Thanks, Dave. So I just wanted to say 30 seconds here about my emphasis on the trip was using the GoPro. So I put together just under 10 minutes of my clips into a little movie, and that's what we're going to kick this show off with. But it was a trip of a lifetime. You know, I'm a geologist and a hydrologist, and it was record drought in the southwest of the Colorado Basin, and still is, getting worse. So, you know, just being on the water, being in the flow of the Colorado River, the famous Colorado River, which I had never done, and being in the canyon and seeing all those rocks, it was a dream come true for sure. And so 30 years ago, our presentation was the story of our honeymoon trip, which was in La Silla Cortez. So we were in a kayak at that time. This was our 30th anniversary trip. So yeah, we were in a different kind of boat, but it was wonderfully romantic.
More on that later. So now we've got canyon walls being carved into the upper layers, and as the plateau rises, then the river keeps cutting down. Okay, so the river acts as a knife. It's cutting down into the rising layers. That's called uplift, and then incision into the uplift.
Jeez. Oh. Oh. Oh.
High side left, man.
Come on. Yoo-hoo! Yeah! One, two, three. Oh my God. Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo! Woo! Ow!
I like living on the edge.
Want us out?
Yeah.
Great. It was so fun.
Yeah.
I loved it. Yeah. How about, were you guys in the front or back or? Oh. They don't get
And then just use the
bumps.
pressure of the wall against your back. Nice.
Yeah, that was. Oh boy, make a big deal because this will be the only time I ever do something this big. Oh my God. Back touchdown.
Hold like a bird on the wing of the sea.
So thank you to Ann for that little teaser film. And now how about we take a little Dory trip down the river together. So as it's come up a couple of times, this was our 30th anniversary, so a very special trip for us. And our journey began at the yellow era here, a place called Pipe Creek. We hiked down from the south rim on the Bright Angel Trail and met the boats, and then we finished at a place called Diamond Creek. There were others on the trip that did an 18-day trip, and they went all the way from the Green Arrow, Lee's Ferry, to the Red Arrow. So about 137 river miles is what we covered, and 68 rapids. I had never been to the Grand Canyon before, so I wanted to make sure we got there a few days early, and boy, I just had a blast. The light, the colors, the geology, it's just phenomenal. So this is one of my favorite sunset shots. And then this is sunrise from a similar viewpoint the next morning. So in our family, we don't take selfies, we take solfies, because Ann's last name is Soule. So this is the first solfie of the trip. It's about 6 a.m. in the morning, a little bit after first light, and we're about to descend, I think it's a little under 8 miles, 7.8 miles or so, down the Bright Angel Trail to Pipe Creek, where we met the boats. And this is what it looks like. This is the trail here, kind of comes through here and then drops down. It's a very well-maintained trail, heavily traveled, lots of switchbacks. We were carrying all our own gear with us, so it was a bit of a challenge. But there are water stops and latrines along the way, so all in all, very doable hike. So this was the group that we spent 11 days with. There were 24 of us, so 16 clients, 4 Dory oarsmen, all males, and then 3 that were oarsmen on rafts that are baggage boats. 3 of them were women, and then there was a 4th one that was a guy. And we didn't know any of these folks prior to the trip, so and we'll get into the people aspect of this, but one of the things Ann and I always like to say, our lessons of travel, seems like no matter where it is it's usually the people that make or break a trip. So I wanted to introduce you to some of the people here. This is Andre. This is Andre at the helm of his personal dory that he had on the trip called Black Canyon. And Andre is in his early 70s. He's been guiding trips on the river for 50 years. And the photo on the right here is Andre and a likeness of himself 50 years earlier on the cover of a magazine. I think he told me he had been down the river more than 150 times. And not only a phenomenal storyteller and obviously knowledge of river and the rapids, but he's also a professional geologist, teaches at a college in Arizona, and you saw a little bit of the video clip Ann showed earlier of him giving us a geology lesson, which was amazing. It was far better than anything I learned at any of the park visitor centers, or something about being there and having him draw it in the sand was phenomenal. So this is John. John also had his personal dory along called Animas. John is in his mid-50s and is a world-class skier. He guides professionally in Colorado for half the year when he's not in the canyon for the other half. And he was also an artist. He had everybody, a little hard to tell what he's doing here, but he figured out how to collect river clay and then turn it into beads and little pots and then fire them over the coals of a wood fire. Next we have Steve. Steve was our poet of the trip. He has some published poetry in a magazine called the Boatman's Quarterly, which publishes a lot of essays and poems written by river guides. And Steve definitely won the award for most outfit changes per day. He had a giant dry bag just full of skirts and tights and hats and ties. Super fun. All of these guys are just amazing individuals. And this was the trip leader, Corey, and I'll spend a little bit of time on Corey because well, for starters, he and I developed a great relationship together. I like to tease and heckle people, and he gave it right back to me. Started on day one from the very first time we shook hands. But Corey is in his early 40s, and the only real relevance to that is there's a hierarchy of guiding in the canyon, and you typically have to spend 20 to 25 years on rafts and other boats before they'll even let you attempt to take a dory down the river. And I'll get into why that is in a bit, but Corey was a phenomenal individual. He had less experience than the other three guides, but they all completely respected him. And the thing about being a river guide in the canyon is you are a medic, you're a psychologist, you are a sanitation engineer, you're a cook. You pretty much have to do it all and know it all. You've got to know some geology, some archaeology, some cultural history, plants and animals, hydrology. So these are really remarkable human beings. And then we had the baggage boaters. So this is Georgie, and Georgie lives in Tahoe in the off season and does ski patrol work there. And she often guides trips in Idaho as well as the Grand Canyon. And you can see here how much baggage it takes to send 24 people down a river for this many days. This is Kirsten. Kirsten was the youngest of the staff. She had just graduated a few years ago from Stanford with a marine sciences degree, and is kind of at that stage of life trying to figure out what she wants to do next, if she's going to go to grad school or apply for jobs or maybe just be a river rat for a while. This is Tony, and Tony is one of the lead guides for oars in Idaho. And he turned 46 on the trip, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, this hierarchy of the guides, he's still trying to get into a dory. He's been at it 20 some years now. So right away, day one, we hiked down, met up with the boats, and two of the biggest rapids of the entire trip were on day one, Horn Rapid and Granite Rapid. And just to give you a quick sense of, so in the canyon, they rate the rapids on a scale of 0 to 10. And both of these, Horn and Granite, were 8. And then the drop, so the vertical drop from the top of the rapid down to the bottom of the rapid was about 9 feet in Horn Rapid, and it was about 20 feet in Granite Rapid. So right away, it was a full-on immersion experience. And this is a good shot of the dory going down. Everybody's helmeted up. And then this is the boat in front of us disappearing in the standing waves. All you can see is helmets there. And where's the boat? Gives you a sense of the size of some of these waves. And Ann, was loving it. Full-on immersion, literally within half an hour of getting in the boats. We were completely drenched and loving it. One of the things you can kind of tell as we go through some of these images here is that if we don't have helmets on, then the guides, think it's mostly going to be sort of a roller coaster ride, but no huge danger of somebody coming out of the boats or hitting your head on the rocks. But if you have the helmets on, then the guides are taking it seriously and there's potential danger. Just phenomenal beauty, the water, the colors, the light. But not everything is about the big rapids. There's plenty of time spent just floating. And the beauty of that is you get to look around at the amazing geology and the critters. So just here we're looking at 1.73 billion years, billion with a B, in history from the top of the crest here down to water level. For any of you that have been up Hurricane Ridge before, this is Columnar Basalt, which we have here locally, just not on this sort of scale. Just to give you a frame of reference, that's 2 people standing there, so this is several hundred feet high. Crazy patterns of the columnar basalt. And I should mention quickly, all the photos that are not mine, I've been very careful to credit the photographer. So they're, a lot of these images are not mine, they were from some of our trip mates. Another kind of cool geology feature here. So we think that these little stalactite formations were from water that was up above, dripping down off of about a 15-foot cliff, and it was mineralized, so it was forming these little miniature. These are about 3 or 4 inch tall stalactites. So Ann mentioned in her intro that she had a geology degree undergrad and a hydrology degree for her master's. And oh my gosh, she was in her element in the canyon. Rocks and water, that's what the canyon's all about. And so here she's exploring this side canyon called Indian Creek. There was no water in it, but you can certainly see the staining on the rock where during monsoon season and certain high flows, there would be water just streaming off the top of this ledge. I like this picture again for a sense of scale. So you can see a raft there, and then this is 7,600 feet roughly to the top of the ridge. So as you're drifting down through the canyon, you're just jaw-dropped most of the time, just in awe of these incredible geologic formations. The Dory men all slept on their boats at night. There was this definite love of the boats, and I'll get into that some more. They are beautiful craft, works of art. But the very first night of our trip, there was hellacious winds and rain, and I felt bad for these guys because these little tarps over the top were useless. They woke up the next morning and they were drowned rats. Fortunately, that was the only bad weather of the whole trip. Ann and I, after that, decided we don't need a tent. We're just going to sleep out on a tarp under the stars. And this is why. So this is looking at sorry about that. This is looking at a ridge called Powell's Plateau, named after John Wesley Powell. And along the way, I started writing these little haiku poems. So this one is, Powell Plateau looms, time-etched strata give one pause, each breath a prayer. We were there a few days after the full moon, so we had some wonderful moon rises over the north rim. And as I mentioned, the guides all sleep in their boats, so here I am prowling around at night, and they're all decked out and asleep here. And this is it's so bright because of the light of the moon. And this was the door prize photo that the gentleman is going home with. So this is one of the Orionid meteors. Lots of hikes. So going down the canyon isn't just about being in the raft and big water and high adrenaline. Honestly, most of it's about interacting with your teammates and going on these side hikes and canyons. There's all these slot canyons. This one was a particular favorite of mine. Extraordinary light, and then you get in there and you look up. This was late afternoon in the day, and it's like the walls just started glowing. It was magical. Kind of a typical morning scene where everybody's bringing their gear down to the rafts to get loaded up for the day. And one of the traditions that Corey implemented that I really liked was before we would push off every day, he would read a poem, tell a story from his personal experience. And some of the time he read poems written by Steve in the red hat there. But it was just a great kind of moment of reverence to start the day. We saw bighorn sheep pretty much every day, small groups, 2 or 3 at a time, but always fun to see them, and they seemed not at all bothered by us. So here we are scouting a rapid. So when the guides know from experience, and they're all, as you got the sense earlier, very, very experienced running the river, but running the river changes based on the flows, and the flows change based on what's being released from the dam and then what's coming in off the side canyons and what the rainfall has been. So here we're scouting, and Corey there in the pink tutu is telling us what it is that the guides are seeing downstream and what to expect. So they give us kind of this overview, and then the guides themselves spend about another 15, sometimes as long as a half an hour, talking about, well, when I last ran it, we went river right. Well, when I last ran it, it was about these same flows, and you got to watch out for this rock. So they are pretty meticulous about their planning. And job number 1 is to get the clients, to get us down the river safely. But job number 2 is they don't ever want to hit anything in a dory. In a raft, you can bounce off rocks, you can sort of bump stuff, no big deal. But in these beautiful wooden boats, you don't ever want to hit anything. So this particular rapid, they determined that because of the low flows, it was going to be a boulder garden, and they wanted us out of the boats because just that little bit of less weight would allow them to travel through with less likelihood of hitting anything. So it was fun for me because I got to get some great photos of each of the dorymen, in their boats. And I mentioned earlier, so this is John, and this is his personal dory, Animas. And Ann and I were in the boat when this happened on day 1. We don't, honestly, we didn't feel it, we didn't hear it, we don't know what the boat actually hit. It's probably just something that was just barely 6 inches, maybe a foot under the water, and all it took was one tap, and it resulted in a fiberglass repair job that night. This is Andre and his personal boat, the Black Canyon. And this is Steve in a boat called Lava Cliff that belongs to Oars. And I liked this one in black and white because it just had sort of a timeless feel to it to me. And that's Corey, the trip leader, going through this rapid solo. And just for frame of reference, this is what John Wesley Powell's boats looked like. This is from the second expedition in 1871. The first expedition was in 1869, but there was no photographer along on that trip. And anyway, he named this boat the Emma Dean after his wife. And here we are. This is the scene that you don't ever want to see. Steve has his boat up, just examining the hulls, and each of the oarsmen would do this pretty regularly, because sometimes even just little micro cracks can make a difference. So all repaired and back on the river again. And here we are at a lunch break. Typically they would find nice sunny spots, often with ledges, where it became this giant yard sale, and people would spread everything out to dry out. And then by the time we were back in the boats to get going again, everything had dried. So just a quick word about the food. I think it's amazing. So that at the start of the trip, we only did 11 days. Some of the people were on the river for 18 days, but all the food for the entire journey started in the boats on day one. There was no resupply. And we had fresh fruit, including fresh, ripe avocados every single day of the trip. How they do that, I can't do that at home. I don't know how they pull it off on the river, but the food was amazing. And I often took advantage of, nice flat places to catch a nap while everybody else was eating, because I was spending so much of the night out taking star photos. This is one of our trip mates, Nikki here, and she is laying on this wonderful, shiny, polished black rock called Vishnu schist. And after she got up, I assumed the position, and I can tell you that it was like 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the ambient air. It was like laying on a big thermal pad. It was awesome. Typical kind of camp scene here. You can see all the boats lined up. They're all staked. So the guides took this very seriously, because even in a 5-minute pee break, the river flows can change. So they don't ever step out of their boat. The very first thing they do is stake it and tie it. And then you can see in the background here our community circle. It's one of the things I really loved about the social aspects of the trip. This was definitely a gathering place where people would write in journals and share photos from the day, stories, get to know each other. All of these people had amazing life stories. And I will say, one of the things I really loved about this experience was everyone was unplugged. There was not a time where anybody pulled out a device and was, texting or seeing if there was a signal, and it makes for a real presence. You're in the moment, and you're living in the moment, and you're appreciating the place for all of its glory. The light is obviously phenomenal as it descends and changes colors on the cliff faces, but also the water starts to glow. This is a kind of typical kitchen scene. So this is a propane tank here and a 3-burner stove. A lot of the cooking happened on propane, but then they also had charcoal. We did not suffer at all in the eating department. We had steaks and pork chops and chicken and chili, and it was all excellent. We happened to be there on Halloween, so of course these flamboyant guides that were already dressing up in costumes every day had Halloween costumes on top of the other costumes. Super fun evening. Ann and I both dressed up with whatever we scrabbled together, as did others. It was a memorable part of the whole trip. This is in a back eddy. One of the beauties of being there in October and November, kind of late season like we were, is the National Park Service allows campfires. So what better place to collect firewood than a back eddy where there isn't even any beach because the wood is stacked 3 or 4 feet high. So pretty much every night we had a campfire. Again, very social aspect to that. Kirsten played guitar and sang some nights, and other nights, this is Andre, the longtime guide, telling just crazy stories of the early days and what it was like back when they didn't know if Dories would work on the Grand Canyon, and they were crashing every day and doing repairs every night, and it took them a while to kind of get to the point that they could safely take clients. Well, this is just an example of some of the little pottery beads and little bowls that Ann and I made. And when you're on a trip with a Scotsman, then of course they're going to bring a bottle of single malt Scotch that this was a farmer, Willie, who this particular distillery was a mile from his house, so he knew the distillers, and he brought this wonderful Scotch to share. Lots of waterfalls along the way. This one's called Stone Creek Falls. It was one of my favorite. We all visited it together as a group. And then, of course, I went back there at night because I thought, oh, how cool would it be to photograph it by moonlight? So this is a nighttime shot. And this is the next day, Deer Creek Falls. I believe this is about 100 to 150 foot drop, quite impressive falls. And this was probably my favorite side hike of the trip. This went up Deer Creek Canyon to a place called the Patio. And I think it was the only time on the trip where the guides kind of got out of, playful, fun-loving into a kind of a serious mode. So it definitely got our attention. And the reason was they said, what you're about to do is a gift, and you should treat it as such. We're about to enter the sacred lands of the Southern Paiute people, and they have these beliefs about their origin story is based on this canyon and this waterfall. So it was a lovely place to spend some time, but there wasn't any, loud voices or anything other than sort of quiet contemplation. Some people journaled, some people napped, some people were painting. Here, Ann and two of our trip mates are looking at marine fossils on the underside of this ledge, which is pretty cool. Here we are in the Grand Canyon, and there's marine fossils. And this is Ann on her little perch where she was doing some watercolor painting, which is something that she does on many of our trips, and I love that she does that. And this is kind of her painting of that scene. And I, of course, was wandering around, taking lots of photos. For whatever reason, they seemed more meaningful to me in black and white, just the textures and the layers of the rock and the moving water. So just a little series here of some black and white photos. That's one of our trip mates, Steve, there, who lives in Seattle. And another, for sense of scale, that's another friend there, Bill, laying on the rock. Pretty dramatic in terms of just all the layering in the rock and the different shapes and textures. So this is, as we're about to hike back down now to our dories, back down to the bottom of the waterfall, and we're looking upstream here at some of the territory that we've already traveled through. Here we are back on the river and heading downstream, and this this photo makes me laugh every time I see it. This was right after a rapid called Upset Rapid, and everybody came out of it with these huge grins on our faces and laughing, and nobody was upset about anything. Lovely photo that was taken by our friend Bill. Again, this is a view looking upstream, kind of what we've already traveled through, and it just gives you a sense of for big portions of the journey, you're kind of walled in with high cliffs on either side. And then as you get down to the lower end, the river gets a little wider, and the elevation of the rim is not quite as high. It opens up some. So this particular side hike was a place called National Canyon, and Corey, the trip leader, said before we started hiking up, you guys aren't going to believe me, but we're going to find water. And of course we're hiking over this dry, parched land. But sure enough, about a mile back, we found some water, and Andre pulled out his recorder, and oh my gosh, what a magical experience. It was like an outdoor amphitheater with the sound reverberating off of the walls of the canyon. It was definitely a memorable moment of the trip. Two sisters here that we became good friends with. It's Kathy on the left and Sue on the right. And they, partway through the trip, maybe halfway through the trip, said, we want to do something special for these guides. What can we do? And they came up with this idea that they were going to give each of the guides a foot massage and paint their toenails. So the first one, John here, had that done. And I love this photo of Ann's. You can see his eyes are rolling into the back of his head, sort of like a puppy when you rub their paw and their eyes just roll back. And then it went on from here. So the second guy that got it done, he got a calf massage in addition to the foot massage. And then the third guy, he got a back rub and calf and foot. And then the fourth one, he got his food delivered to him while he was, so it was just kind of a fun thing that these two sisters did, and we all loved it as well. So as Anna and I were driving to the canyon, whoever wasn't driving was reading out loud this book called The Emerald Mile, which is a true story of the fastest journey ever down the Grand Canyon, 36 hours and 30 minutes or something along those lines. Anyway, it was at flows that are now believed to have been at about 100,000 CFS. CFS is cubic feet per second, and for those of you that means nothing to, for frame of reference, when we were there, it was on the order of 6,000 to 8,000 CFS. And the Dungeness River right here next to us some of the highest recorded flows on the Dungeness are about 7,000 CFS. So this was an extraordinary accomplishment. Not quite sure how they survived. I'm not sure they're quite sure how they survived. But these three very experienced Dory oarsmen took a Dory down the river at these high flows. So in the oars warehouse, this is a replica of the boat, the Emerald Mile. It's not the actual boat that they used. This just gives you a sense of the beauty and the craftsmanship that goes into these boats, and it's also a lot of work. You can see major repairs here and a hole there, and they're in constant repair. Again, as I said, you don't ever want to hit anything, but when you're going down a river of rock, it's kind of inevitable. On our trip, 3 of the 4 boats had to do repairs at some point. And these are ones that, they've now been retired. They didn't fare so well. So the guy that kind of founded this whole idea of let's try and take the original John Wesley Powell Dory, which the modern day Dories are patterned after, down the Grand Canyon. So this is Martin Litton, and this particular, his photo is on the inside of a hatch cover. This is a waterproof hatch on one of the Dories. And this Dory was called Marble Canyon, was named in honor of Martin, who was, in addition to, you know, an adventurous spirit, and the one credited with figuring out, yes, we can safely take dories down the river. He was also an ardent environmentalist, helped prevent another dam below Glen Canyon that was going to go in at Marble Canyon, which is why this boat was named Marble Canyon. And he's also the one that came up with this idea of let's name dories after places that we've lost as a reminder of what's at stake, and you know, and what we can do to be trying to protect and save wild places. So this you've already seen, but I just again wanted to show you, this is the boat Marble Canyon that was named after Martin Linton, or I shouldn't say named after him, built in his honor. Extraordinary artwork on the bow of the boat. And as you're probably getting the sense, I kind of developed this love affair with the dories. So here's another little haiku I wrote. Dory meets canyon, oar and river exchange vows, whispers of soulmates. So now we're going to get into the adrenaline junkie portion of the show. We're here at the top of Lava Rapids. So earlier I mentioned the scale and the vertical drop. So Lava Rapids is considered the biggest and most dangerous of the rapids in the canyon. It's a 10 on a scale of 10. And if you include lower lava, which is down here, from the top to the bottom, it's a 37-foot drop in vertical elevation. So it might not look like much from here, but you'll get a sense in just a minute how big and wild this water is. And the arrow there is indicating my photography perch. So I elected, I'd already been through a lot of the big rapids, and I thought, how cool would it be to photograph the rest of the group coming through and then be able to share that with them. So now you're going to get to go through Lava Falls from my perspective on my little photographer perch. just one quick word. From my photographer's perspective, watching those boats go through, I think my heart was in my throat much more than theirs was. They were just in the moment, but there were moments where I thought, I'm gonna watch 4 swimmers here as a boat cracks in half as they were going through these giant standing waves. So now you get to watch what it was like being in the front of a dory going through. And this is footage thanks to our friend Bill. Some of the sound that you could hear there, so when the guides want you to do something, it's usually either going to be high side right or high side left, and what that means is you are literally throwing instantaneously all your weight to that one side of the boat to keep it from completely flipping over. So you could hear Corey there yelling high side right, and then at the end you could hear Bill saying, "Water went up my nose." So I would be doing all of you a disjustice if you've been down the river or you're thinking about going on a trip down the canyon if I were to say that it's all about the adrenaline rush and the big rapids. Because honestly, it's not. There's so much more to the trip. It's about being quiet and being present and just being in this absolutely amazing place. So this, for example, is an unnamed side canyon. I mean, literally on our river map, it was just named after the river mile. You could go hiking and exploring every single day in country like this. Spectacularly beautiful. Lots of critters along the way. I believe there's 18 different species of lizards in the canyon. I don't know what their names are, but just a few examples of some of the ones we saw. This one was particularly striking. It had this beautiful indigo colored tail, which was quite long. I believe it's probably one of the whiptail lizards, but I don't know for certain. There were a few creepy crawlies along the way, but nothing too significant. This was one of the more beautiful centipedes I've ever seen. People worry about snakes. Didn't see a single snake. In fact, I talked to Andre, the guide in his 70s who's been down 150 plus times, and he's only seen 6 rattlesnakes in all of his various different trips down the canyon. They're there, and there are a number of different species of snakes, but they're just not commonly seen. Praying mantis here that has some kind of a bug all wrapped up in its grasp. And then there's the stuff that's there that you don't see, but they sort of leave sign behind. So this is a bobcat track here. And lots of different species of cacti. These are barrel cactus. This is a little tiny cactus here called a claret cup cactus. This is kind of the one you have to most watch out for. If you're gonna fall, don't fall into this one. This is called teddy bear choya, and it has very long, very sharp spines. Prickly pear was the most ubiquitous of the cacti we saw. And this is my personal favorite. This is Ocotillo. Just for a sense of scale, these stalks were about, I'm guessing, 12 to 14 feet tall. And at certain times of the year, they get these beautiful, very showy red flowers. So along the way, we got to learn, some of the cultural history of the place. This is a particularly noteworthy site. This is at a place called Whitmore Wash, and the thing that makes it particularly interesting to archaeologists is there are 3 different time eras and 3 different civilizations represented here in the pictographs. So there's pre-Anasazi, Anasazi, and Southern Paiute all represented. And I can't tell you which drawings belong to which, but yeah, it was just fascinating to get a bit of the cultural history of the land. The rocks and the water, that's the story of the canyon. So this one took me, I think, about 4.5 hours to collect all these rocks and arrange them in exactly the pattern that I wanted to. So this is a fun photo because it's a reflection looking into a pool of water and a rock, and you're looking at the ledge of the rock wall, the canyon rim behind me. Lots of beautiful skies. I mean, it's just, it's endlessly beautiful and different every day, different every hour as the light changes, the mood changes. Yeah, it was one of the best trips we've ever taken. And then there's the beauty of the people as well. So earlier in the trip, Corey had read a poem by Steve called The State of Grace. And downstream of our boat, Brian in one of the other dories said, "Hey Steve, do you think you could recite that by memory?" And he thought about it and he said, yeah, I'll do that. And he stood up all erect, and as he was oaring us down the river, he recited aloud this poem called The State of Grace, which was gorgeous. But the other thing that made the whole experience magical was that Corey in the boat downstream, he was rowing the opposite direction. So he was going backwards, Steve was going forwards, and they did this little dance with the bows of their boats within about a foot of each other while Steve's reciting this poem and while Corey's, going downstream without knowing what he's really headed towards. There's so many stories, so many fun moments in a trip like this. This is a super fun photo for me that Ann took. I was very keen at the start to get to try to row a dory, but I didn't know if they would allow us to. And sure enough, anyone that wanted to could. On these flat water sections, they didn't let us anywhere near the rocks. And Ann taking a spell at the helm here. And then you got to see earlier the cliff jumping, was another adrenaline rush moment that we didn't expect or weren't prepared for, but Ann took full advantage. This is Kirsten, obviously posing for the paparazzi as she did her leap. And then Ann did it twice, once with the helmet and the GoPro on, and then a second time without. And I found this quote in my after we came back from the trip, I started digging into all these different books about the canyon and the Powell expedition, and I found this quote that I wanted to share from John Wesley Powell. "Something like these are the feelings we experience tonight. The river rolls by us in silent majesty. The quiet of the camp is sweet. Our joy is almost ecstasy." He wrote this, of course, after they had barely survived, and 3 of their members had hiked off, and this is after separation rapids and many travails. But the point is that I seized on was our joy is almost ecstasy, because this is 24 faces of our trip mates, joy bordering on ecstasy. It was a phenomenal trip. As I mentioned, none of us knew each other at the start of the trip, which is always a bit of a risk when you're heading in. But I think what made it work was everybody was just present and open, and we had this wonderful group of guides and staff to, take all the difficulty out of it for us and just have us be able to truly enjoy and treasure being there. So towards the end of the trip, folks started talking about, when I go back home, I'm going to be doing this, and when I get back to the real world, this is what's going to happen. And so this little haiku was my rebellion against that. And so I wrote, tango of rapids, slow waltz of stars across sky, this is the real world. So this is the very last photo I took. This is Corey at the helm of Marble Canyon, reading a poem before I think we had maybe 2 miles down to our takeout spot, and it was all flat water. But as he was reading, the sun just broke over the ridge, and I broke into tears. It was just it was kind of the end of the journey, this epic adventure, and what more magical way to end it than with a poem and the sun coming over the rim to warm us all. And that concludes the program, and hopefully you get a sense now of how the river runs through us. And maybe if somebody could turn the lights up, we'll field some questions here. Or I should hand the mic to Ann and let her. I've been doing all the talking. Question was, where do we sign up? So we did this trip through a company called Oars, and we booked it a year and a half in advance, which is about you can't just decide, I want to go there this year and get on the river. You have to plan ahead.
This trip about 40 years ago, and that water was so damn cold, you weren't going in it. It surprised me that you were in it at all.
Yeah, so the question was, he did the river 40 years ago, and the temperature of the water was so cold, he's amazed that we were even able to go in the water. It's about comparable to Puget Sound in terms of temperature. It's 48 to 52 degrees pretty much year-round because it comes out of the bottom of the reservoir. And so the water that's released downstream coming out of the reservoir is pretty darn cold. But the temperatures were warm enough that we were able to do okay. Did you want to add?
Well, I think being late October, early November, it was as warm as it probably ever is. But it doesn't get warm. That water never gets warm because it always comes out of the bottom of the reservoir.
Yeah, Michael.
So it's the Amazon or the Yangtze River next?
Yeah, the question is, what's next? Well, funny that you asked that question. For those of you that know Ann and I, we always kind of have something in the works and some next trip in mind. So we're actually going back. We had an opportunity dropped in our laps by a good friend who's in the audience tonight, who had put together a trip and had 2 people cancel. So we're going to get to do the upper section that we did not do. So we're going to do the first 7 days that we missed, and then we'll be hiking out to the south rim instead of hiking in and doing the lower canyon. So it will again be an October A little earlier this time, early October trip, but yeah, that's our next river journey, is going back to the Grand Canyon. Yeah, go ahead.
The shot that you showed of you examining the marine fossils, what kind of fossils did you see there, and what geologic era were you in?
I'll hand it to the geologist.
They were worm castings, and I think they were trilobites, so that would put it a long time ago. No, Permian, I don't remember. There was the Precambrian schist and granite, and then there was just a lot of sedimentary rock above that. Literally the entire geologic spectrum. So I don't remember. That was in Tapeats. Was that in the Tapeats?
Tapeats sandstone,
yeah. I could use one of our books and look it up. Somebody, oh, hi Claire, go ahead.
Isn't that the rock there is the oldest rock in the North, at least in North America? Billions of years.
Yeah,
That's your
billions of years, yeah. Yep, the Vishnu schist and the Precambrian granodiorite, the reddish granite rock, was the oldest. And if you have read any of the John Wesley Powell accounts, that black rock, every time they came to it, they knew there was going to be horrible rapids because of the kind of rock it was. And when it broke up, it just created these big boulders that were hard to get through. And they kept curling around to another bend that would hit the black rock again, and it was dreadful for them. I know there were some hands further back. Okay.
You stole my thunder. I wanted to know if you were going to go back.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
One up here in the front, yeah.
Okay.
I never imagined a fully supported trip like this. So, did you have any camp duties at all, or was everything taken care of? You just got off the boat, had supper, somebody did groover duty?
Yep, that's groover duty. Yep, that's exactly right. That's the sanitation duty. It was a splurge for our anniversary, and yeah, everything was taken care of. We hiked down with only our clothes and our camera gear and a snack and everything else, sleeping bags, pads. It was fully supported. And we weren't supposed to have to do anything if we didn't want to help,
But they did all the camp duties for you?
Yep, all the camp duties.
Man, that's the way to go.
I will add to that, though, that they were more than thrilled if we offered to help with food prep or cooking or loading the boats. Or typically clients don't do that, but on our trip we were all kind of go-getters, and we didn't want to just stand around and watch them do everything. So everybody pitched in, and but yeah, we paid our money, we showed up, we did the trip, we didn't have to do any food planning, any route finding, yeah.
So, when they put in at the launch, once you go under that cable, there's no going back. So some group came to where you got on the boat and they got off and hiked out? Was that
correct, yeah. Yeah, so there were 8 people that started at the top. They hiked out to the rim as we hiked in, and we literally crossed paths, and then we got on the river and went the rest of the way. So there were 8 that did the upper canyon, 8 that did the lower canyon, and then 8 that did the whole canyon.
And did you meet them at Bright Angel?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you run into any other parties while you were floating?
The question was, did we run into any other parties? Yes. For a couple of days, we were kind of leapfrogging several other private trips. So to do a trip on the Grand Canyon, there's kind of 2 routes you can go. You can go with a commercial company like Oars, which we went with, or you can do the lottery, and when your number comes up, put together a private trip. So there were, I think, maybe 4 other private trips that we saw, but the National Park Service controls, like you can't just camp wherever you want to camp. The camps are designated, but you don't have to get to a particular camp on a particular night, which means that you can, if you see there's another party there, then you just go further downriver. And sometimes our leaders, because they kind of wanted to have us separate from others on the river, would go further downriver than what they were planning to, just to put some distance between us and the other parties. Yeah.
Why did you choose Dory's over rafts?
Why did we choose Dory's over rafts? Couple reasons. I love wooden boats. That's probably the simplest answer. Based on the research that I had done in advance, I knew that they were, much higher performance craft, and just the artistry of the boats, but also the artistry. I didn't get in that too much, but those dories are so incredibly maneuverable that literally one flick of the wrist will completely change the trajectory of the boat. And sometimes, as the guides were coming to a rapid, they would turn the boat sideways to go slower, and they would stand up, and you could see them picking their route, and then they would get in the boat, and they'd continue sideways, and then one flick of the wrist at the last second to get into the line that they wanted to be in. So just all of that, the beauty, the size, the fragility of the boats, yeah.
Could you roll if you wanted to?
Could we roll?
Yeah, could you roll?
Yeah, row or roll? No. So we got to try it on flatwater portions. They did allow us to do some rowing. It's quite a bit harder than one would imagine, and it's very counterintuitive for any of you that have rowed a scull or a shell or a rowboat before. You're going this direction as you're oaring, but in these dories, you're facing downstream, and so it's a completely different mechanical motion than what typical rowing is. Yeah.
I was wondering, when you took all the photos for the last of the long rapids, how did you go back down? Because look at all the boats past you.
Oh, I just jumped in the water and swam. No, so, yeah, it was, I wasn't sure it was even going to be possible, because the lead guide, Corey, said, I've never had anybody ask me that before. Everybody wants to go through the big rapids. But so he gave his little talk to the whole group. They walked back to the boats, and then you saw me giving Ann a high five in her little video, and then he walked me to a spot where he thought it would be safe, for me to take pictures from. And then after they were through, I had to kind of scramble up this face and back down to the boats. It took me about 15 minutes to get from but I walked is the short answer. Yeah. If anyone needs to leave, don't feel like, we will not be offended if you get up and walk away. Those that want to remain and ask more questions, that's good too. Candace, did you have something?
What did you use for camera?
So Ann was primarily using a GoPro for the video footage that she did, and for the photography that I did, I had a little waterproof point and shoot digital camera for in the boat, because I didn't want to risk my very expensive lenses and camera gear. And then I had my camera gear in a dry box, and then when we were on shore, I was using a Nikon DSLR, yeah, with 2 different lenses that I brought along.
So
yeah.
How did you decide who
You want to take some of these?
How did you decide what?
Who rowed in which boat?
Oh, it was completely voluntary. Everybody kind of, we didn't find out till like the second day that you're supposed to sort of ask the captain that you might want to be with that day, do you have room in your boat? And so we were just sort of looking around like people would float into these boats and we were like, how does this work? Is it assigned? And finally somebody said, oh, you're supposed to ask the captain in the morning when you have breakfast. So anyway, that was it. And everybody kind of gravitated toward either being with a couple or another couple, and then there was one family of 4 and they always stayed together. But otherwise everybody was just mixing around. I saw another hand there. Yeah, yours?
I was just wondering about the length of time. It sounds like it takes decades for people to get to the point where they're going to go on the Dory. And you kind of touched on it. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, it's trial and error, and if you aren't very good at it, you don't get to keep doing it. I mean, those boats are $40,000 boats, and I think that you start, I think everybody starts with rafts, and then once they get good at that and they become proficient, they have to be trusted to, test out the Dory. And we had, like, some of our baggage boat gals got a chance to try a Dory through a rapid a few times on this trip, from one of the Dory captains. That was it. But they were all wanting to do more than that, I'm sure. There was somebody back. No, okay. Stick around if you have more questions. Thanks for coming.